Chris, welcome to the show. So excited to have you here. I've followed your work for a really long time and finally got the guts to ask you to come on the podcast. So
Oh,
we're happy to have you here. I know you're a wealth of knowledge and we're so excited to learn from you today.
yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me on, and right back at you too. I was able to check out some of your work ahead of this podcast, and I think you're doing some really awesome things on social media and putting out some great content. So likewise.
Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll talk about the keto diet today. And I know one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on is because I know you're not dogmatic about it. Like you talk a lot about being in ketosis and how that's healing for the body, but you're not one of these people who's like, okay, every day I'm peeing on my ketone strips or I'm getting my ketone meter out and I'm making sure I'm above this threshold. And you're all about more of the metabolic flexibility and the importance of that. So really happy that you're joining us and that we can learn from you. But first, tell us a little bit about your background. I love this is called Fast to Heal Stories, and I love to hear why people even get into the space and where they're at. And you're a young guy. So, I mean, usually it takes a while for people like me. I was in the conventional space for almost 2 decades before I was like, oh, this isn't working so well. But yeah, tell us
Yeah.
how you got to where you are and how you got interested in what you're doing now.
Yeah, no, I'm very fortunate that I didn't have to spend a lot of years. I was able to very early on realize how broken a lot of the systems were that I was about to head into for a career, and I was able to pivot before it was too late. Well, I guess it's never too late. You can always make a switch, but yeah. So I first got into nutrition back in my undergrad. I studied biology and exercise science. I got in, I was mostly into exercise at that point, but I was playing basketball and baseball at the college I attended, and nutrition started becoming important to me. I started realizing they can make a big difference as it related to my athletic performance. So I started kind of studying it a little bit, and I took a couple classes in my undergrad, and admittedly, looking back on it, definitely learned a lot of things that were outdated and incorrect. Which is to no fault of any of the professors I had. That was just kind of where the nutrition space was at the time. And so, I graduated from my undergrad, and I was still a little bit more focused on exercise. My plan was to, work my way up. I wanted to be an NBA strength and conditioning coach, was kind of like my main goal. So I started working at a performance facility, training youth, high school, and collegiate athletes. And during that time, I kind of got bit by the nutrition bug again. I had a couple of coworkers who were doing like bodybuilding competitions where, obviously to do those, you really need to have your nutrition dialed in. So I kind of started playing in that space a little bit, and got to learn a little bit more about, some of the basics, just macronutrients and carb cycling and, kind of calories in versus calories out. Just got to kind of first start to consider a lot of these things. And so then I decided, maybe I wanted to go back to school and learn a little bit more about nutrition. So I went to the University of Tampa because there was a professor down there, Dr. Jacob Wilson, who was doing some really cool bodybuilding research, which was kind of what I was into. He was doing it out of a lab down there. So that was kind of one of the reasons why I first decided to go back and attend that university. And then, turns out at that university, there was a really big keto following. My first class, I had a sports nutrition class, and we learned about keto for endurance performance, which I had never heard about before. And I was pretty blown away, being that I was kind of, my first passion in nutrition was as it relates to athletics. I was always told that, you have to have carbohydrates before you exercise. You got to carb load before, you got to replenish glycogen, all of these things. So seeing the research on, low carb and endurance performance, it kind of sparked a little bit of an interest, like, oh, maybe some of those things that I've learned about aren't quite true. It was funny, after that first class, I jumped right in. I remember going to the store and just buying a bunch of keto foods, which at the time, there wasn't like ruled.me out there, or like Diet Doctor, any of these like great resources, or if there were, I didn't know about them yet. So it's definitely a lot of bacon and ranch dressing and cheese, and kind of the dirty keto way. But even so, I had a lot of success on it. Like I felt really good on the keto diet, and at the time I was in university. I was also working as a trainer in a gym, and I had crazy hours where I would go to the gym at 5 in the morning to train until 8 in the morning, and then I worked in my university's exercise science laboratory. So I'd go from there to like 8 to 5 p.m. And then I would go back to the gym and train from like 5 to 10. So I was just crazy, crazy life. And, I'd been doing it for a couple months prior to starting keto. And I remember just, I was always hungry. I was always tired, just dragging butt, slugging back energy drinks like crazy, just to kind of keep myself going. And then like very early on into keto, I started experiencing, I wasn't expecting to experience anything more than maybe a boost in endurance performance, right? That was all I really knew about it. Then I started sensing like, oh, I'm not hungry. I have like way more energy. I'm in a better mood all the time. So then I really started to become more interested in keto. And at that time too, the university that I was at was carrying out keto studies in athletes. So I was getting to really dive into the athletic performance side outside of just endurance. So we got to study keto in some basketball players. I think we had some lacrosse players, some baseball players, soccer players, all kinds of different athletes. So it was really, and we were looking at things that weren't really looked at a ton yet. We were looking at strength. We were looking at body composition. We were kind of looking at some of these, markers that were a little bit outside of what research was what the rest of the body of research was focusing on. So, during that time, it was just kind of a lot of things were coming together, and I was realizing that keto has, it's been around for a long time and it has a lot of potential, but for some reason, a lot of people don't know about it. And it was during that time, it was like my last semester of graduate school. We had a guest professor at our university, and it was Dr. Angela Poff, who works out of Dr. Dominic DiAugustino's laboratory. She had just finished like her PhD, and I had read her dissertation about ketones, exogenous ketones, and cancer, and hyperbaric oxygen therapy, all of that. And so seeing, hearing her work and getting to go through all of that, I kind of introduced to me this side, the therapeutic side of keto that I didn't know about. I was starting to experience some of the personal benefits. I was seeing the athletic benefits, but I didn't know about the potential to combat different chronic diseases. So that really, when I saw that, that kind of was the big eye opener for me that like this was an area that I wanted to do more work in. And one of the things as I continued to read the research that was kind of like most disheartening for me was that there actually was a large body of research, or at least pretty good sized body of research supporting keto for things like neurodegenerative diseases, diabetes, different types of metabolic diseases. And all this information was just kind of locked away in these journals that people either didn't have access to, or if they did have access to it, they wouldn't really be able to interpret it because reading a study is hard. So that was kind of where my brand, the Ketologist, came from. Was I wanted to have this platform, and at the time there wasn't a lot of people putting out information like that. Maybe there were some blogs, but social media. This is back in like 2015, so social media was not as competitive as it is now. And I kind of saw this opportunity to create a lot of educational content to share. I had so much respect for these researchers that I wanted to make sure that their work was getting shared with the masses so that it could be a little bit more impactful. So that was kind of where the Ketologist came from. And that's kind of always been like the driver behind some of the other career decisions that I've made. I joined Perfect Keto in 2018, I think it was, because I wanted to get, I was starting to realize how broken the food system was. And I wanted to be a part of a company that was kind of shaking up that space and seeing, what kind of impact we could make in this kind of uphill battle that is battling big food. So I did that for a few years with Perfect Keto, and that was really an awesome experience. I got to learn, not only a lot about that industry, but also just a lot about business and marketing and things that, now I've taken over to BioCoach, which is the company I'm at now that is a medical tech company that, we're focusing on creating resources and solutions for helping people defeat metabolic disease, right? So it's kind of just, it's always been this kind of passion that one thing has led to the other, but a lot of it's just kind of been rooted in this idea that, keto can be really beneficial for a lot of people. Like you mentioned at the beginning, I'm not dogmatic in that I think it's for everybody or that everybody needs to do it, but, or even that it's the only solution. But what we do know is that it is a good solution that a lot of people find a lot of success with for a plethora of conditions, from, basic lifestyle improvements to battling chronic disease. And that to me, I think is something worth sharing and kind of an industry worth working in.
Yeah, that's an interesting story because you came more to the ketogenic world for the athletic
Mm-hmm.
proponent. Like you don't hear that very often. Most people are like, oh, I found the ketogenic diet because of either weight loss being probably the primary, but other autoimmune diseases or just
Mm-hmm.
needing to heal the body. And I
Yeah.
know as a dietitian, I mean, I've been out of school for a long time, but we basically heard nothing about the ketogenic diet unless it was needed for seizure activity. Like that was basically the only people at that time that would follow it and implement
Hmm.
it. So, yeah, super interesting story. So let's talk
Yeah.
a bit about the exercise component. I don't have a lot of high performance athletes listening to this podcast. I wouldn't imagine, mostly women, mostly 30 to 60 is kind of what mostly listens to this podcast. So let's talk about exercise and how it applies to them, because I have a lot of people who ask, and we'll bring fasting into it too, like, what is the best type of exercise for me? There's so many, I mean, just with any health topic, there's so much information floating around. Like, I heard if I do this exercise, it's going to increase my cortisol and it's going to stress me out. Or
Hmm.
I heard I shouldn't exercise in a fasted state, or, I heard I should exercise after I eat. Like there's just so much. So for the women like 30 to 60 wanting to be in that ketogenic state more often, just for weight loss, for healing, letting the body, get out of its own way, what would you say to them, like, are the most important things as far as like applying exercise into their lifestyle, and maybe how to transition to a lower carb lifestyle and not be afraid? Because I think a lot of people are afraid. Like, I was like you, I was a distance runner. I ran half marathons and marathons, and I would eat right away when I got up in the morning because I thought I had to have that banana and string cheese before I ran, or I
Yeah.
just not ever make it back home. So, I don't even know why I thought, it's like now looking back, it's like, well, duh, we have plenty of fat to burn, but you're just like, you hear all of those things. And I know that was just a lot of questions, but
Yeah.
like, what's the best approach? I don't even want to say the best approach. Like, where do you start as a woman needing to get more activity in, but being kind of afraid of, tapping into that fat fueling system?
Yeah, for sure. Well, and there is a lot of fear around it because, you go on social media and you see a lot of, just a lot of people in the kind of the fitness industry that tend to speak negatively of low carb diets because of, this idea that, and, I will say that it is true that carbohydrates do provide an ergogenic aid, or they do provide a boost in athletic performance. That is a true statement. But the point that you made about not having a lot of high profile athletes that listen to this podcast and having kind of more of just people that are exercising for health, I think that's an important distinguishment to make in that conversation because, for the athlete, like a couple of years ago, I was working in nutrition for an NFL combine camp where these guys are, 6% body fat. They're elite athletes. They're, genetically gifted. They're working really hard. For those guys, and when you, for one, those guys can handle carbohydrates a little bit better. They're extremely
Right.
insulin sensitive people, but also their main goal is performance. That is their primary thing that they're going for. So getting an extra 1, 2, whatever the percent is that you would get from carbohydrates, that's necessary for them. That's the difference between, being successful in their career, having a job, all of those things. So I think we have to look at, our goals when we consider our nutrition as it relates. So, where does exercise performance fall on your goals? Like if if your main goal is to get metabolically healthy, lose weight, feel better, get generally healthy, then, that's where it's okay that you can't lift as much weight as you could before, or that your endurance isn't quite where it was before because of, following this low carb diet, because the low carb diet is going to be checking all of the other boxes that are kind of coming before that. So, and that's not to say that you can't perform on a low carb diet. The thing we do know is that if you get adapted to, being a fat burner, and you get adapted to keto, that you can be very effective, and a lot of your strength and endurance numbers can return to baseline and exceed. But let's just say, if that wasn't the case, I think we still have to consider the fact that that's our primary goal is not performance in this case. Our primary goal is to get healthier. So, having carbohydrates pre-workout, you see the things, people having a Pop-Tart before their workout because they
Yeah.
have to like fuel their thing. It's like, that's probably not necessary for the person whose main goal isn't performance. But I think it also worth considering there is that, these athletes and these really fit people who are doing these type of things, they are insulin sensitive and they can metabolize those carbohydrates. If you're insulin resistant, which is a large portion of our population, then you can't actually use those carbohydrates. So what's the point of having them before the workout anyway, right? You're not really going to be able to tap into them or maximize them. So I think, at least starting there to consider, the fear that is around exercising in the low carb state. I just don't think it's something that we need to worry about. Unless you are listening to this and you're a high profile athlete, then yeah, maybe go for the carbohydrates. But for most of the people listening that's not their top priority, then that's just not something that we have to worry about. Now, I think the next question of like, where does somebody start with this? I think that, it's really important that we do take into consideration what we can do to maximize the ketogenic diet for sports performance, right? Because that's the thing I think that's important about keto is that keto shouldn't look the same for everybody. And there's, very, very different versions of a keto diet that can be applied for different goals. So, in the case of resistance training, which I think, no matter who you are, I think you should be resistance training in some capacity. Whether that's lifting weights or doing resistance bands or whatever, I think it's something that, all ages should be doing. If you're doing something like resistance training, having a keto diet that has more protein is going to obviously be, not only beneficial, but maybe necessary. There was a study that came out a couple of years ago now. It was like a 12-week study looking at the ketogenic diet in people who are resistance training. And, the people who are consuming closer to like the 20-25% protein keto diet were losing muscle. But we don't see that when we start increasing protein to a greater degree. So, I think that you would want to eat more protein to help fuel both the performance and recovery from that exercise. I think supplementing with like electrolytes to make sure that electrolytes are generally important on a low carb diet anyway, but especially when we're exercising and we're, sweating. So we'd want to make sure that we're supplementing with electrolytes. We'd want to make sure that our calorie intake is where it needs to be to kind of support, not only again the performance but also the recovery from the exercise. So I think those are all really important things. Like especially for women, the big things that I tend to see is being very low calorie and exercising, being very low protein and exercising, and then the electrolyte thing I think is universal. Most people are not thinking about the importance of that. But the calories and protein for women are really important because a lot of times you'll see this, oh, keto and exercise is bad for women because of thyroid hormones or because of, all these different reasons. But a lot of times when you look at it, it's not that the keto and the exercise was the problem. It was that, you're eating 1,200 calories, you're trying to be on the stair stepper to burn 1,000 calories, and you're consuming like 50 grams of protein, right? Like that's going to be a recipe for hormone imbalances, for, even, mental health and mood disorders, a lot of different things. So I think it's really important that if you're, the traditional keto diet that was low protein was invented for a much different reason. It was for, children with epilepsy. If we're talking about, full grown women exercising, that's a much different use case for the ketogenic diet. And in that use case, having more protein, I think is really important. So those are a couple things to consider on the nutrition side. And then, just on the types of exercise to do too for people getting started. I always like to highlight that I think the best exercise is the one that you enjoy doing, that you can do consistently, and that you can do at a high intensity. And high intensity is relative. Like, our body, the whole point of exercise is that we stress our body a little bit past what it's normally capable of, so that we can adapt and get whether it's stronger or better endurance or better mitochondrial function, all down the road there. So, if that's the goal, what are the things that you can find to do that? For some people, it might just be going for a walk every morning, and that's something that you enjoy. You can be consistent, you can pick up your pace. Intensity is relative. It's just about pushing yourself a little bit. For some people, for me, it's like you're never going to catch me on a stair stepper or a piece of cardio machine, but I love playing basketball. So I'll go play basketball several times a week, and that's what I love doing. So it's easy for me to do it. So I think when exercise becomes hard is when we choose something that we hate doing, that when that alarm goes off in the morning, we're dreading it. We're like, oh, we got to go to that Zumba class that I hate, or we got to go to that cycling thing. So I think the more we can find things that we actually love and enjoy doing, the better we'll be at kind of sticking to them. So I think those are a few things. And that's all to say that if you're listening to this and you've never exercised and you're thinking, oh, I want to start exercising and I want to start doing keto, you can definitely do both, and you can get started, today. But just know that it may take your body a little bit of time to kind of adjust to the diet and to ramp up to the point of, you feeling good. So take it easy. I think you don't have to start training for a marathon today and start the ketogenic diet today. I think you can kind of ease your way into doing both and doing them consistently.
Yeah. And for my population, I always try to especially if they're not real active, like let's work up to walking and weights. Like those are the first two things to always get started with for metabolic, if you're metabolically ill, like just get burning some of that blood sugar, and so it's not stored as much, and then really getting those muscles a little bit healthier, and focusing on those two things. But and yeah, I really think it's important to distinguish like where you are at now and where you want to move to. But yeah, very, very great points there. I know you co-wrote a book called Keto Answers with Dr. Anthony Is it Gustin? I don't want to mispronounce.
Yeah, Gustin. Okay. Yep, you got it.
Yeah, and it came out in August of 2019. And I love the format of that book because it's just like, I think everybody loves Q&A. Like people love Q&A episodes. They love to write in their questions and their answers. And, but can you tell us like a couple, like the top couple of questions that you seem to get, surrounding, and I know that this is all about the ketogenic diet. And I think it's important to just mention, when people hear the word keto, a lot of times they just think like fat, like I got to eat fat all day. Like I got to put MCT oil in my coffee. I have to, make fat bombs. I have to like there's different ways of doing the ketogenic approach, like you were just mentioning. And we need to remember, like, it's a state of burning ketones rather than just fueling on glucose all the time. And I think people just get that idea in their head, like if I'm keto, I have to be following this macronutrient breakdown or I'm not going to be in ketosis ever. So I know a lot of the book focuses around those kind of misconceptions, but yeah, just give us a couple of like the top two questions that people ask you about and the answers to those. But we don't want to, there's 268 in there. So
we won't go through them all. No, it's funny because that's actually kind of the reason why we wrote it Q&A format, was that both, Anthony and I were getting so many questions on social media, and a lot of them were the same questions. So we kind of realized like that this Q&A format would be, we thought it would be something that people would really like, and the book was pretty successful. So I think that was the case. But for, a couple of the questions that we get, some of the most important or some of the most common ones, the one that you just highlighted is a big one. And I think there's a lot of questions that kind of fall into that category. Things like, how many carbs should I eat? What is the optimal level of ketosis? Do I have to stay keto all the time? A lot of those are kind of the questions that fall into there. And that is something that we're a little bit different from other people, is that we don't really believe that there's one version of a keto diet. Like you stated, keto and ketosis is a metabolic state in which you have elevated blood ketones, and that can be elevated at 0.3 millimolars, which is a much lower state, all the way up to 3.5 millimolars, which is a pretty deep state of ketosis. And there's plenty of different routes of getting there, right? You can get there by doing the standard keto diet of 20% macro or 20% protein, 75% fat, 5% carbohydrates, but you can also do it by doing more intermittent fasting and calorie restriction, and maybe consuming more carbohydrates or exercising at a higher intensity. So there's a lot of different ways of getting to this goal of having elevated ketones. So, that's why our answers to those questions are always pretty vague, and they're more of the, it depends, because it depends on what your goal is, right? Like what your optimal macronutrient ratio on keto is dependent on what your goals are. What's your, the optimal carbohydrate intake, or the best, the most optimal ketone level that you should be in, is all based on what your goal is. If your goal is to burn some fat, then you don't need to be focusing on super high ketone levels. If your goal is to, do something therapeutically or optimize your brain function, then yeah, being in a deeper state of ketosis is going to be more beneficial. So a lot of those questions around, the specificity of the diet, we, sometimes frustrating to people because it feels like maybe we're skirting the answer there. But really the truth is that, nutrition, even within a diet that seems kind of set in stone like keto, nutrition still is individualized and personalized. So I think that's a big one. But over the years, I think the two, outside of those questions, I think the two questions that have been the most popular that always pop up, one is net carbs versus total carbs. And the other one is, if somebody has to stay keto forever. So to address the first one, the net carbs versus total carbs, I actually posted about this the other day that, when I first started keto, and I guess let's lay some framework there. Net carbs is what we have left when we subtract fiber and sugar alcohols from total carbohydrates. So the idea with net carbs is that you're not tracking the carbohydrates that are blood sugar spiking, or I'm sorry, you are tracking the carbohydrates that are blood sugar spiking, and you're not tracking the ones that theoretically are not blood sugar spiking, like fiber. So when I first started keto, this was great because the worst that could happen if you track net carbs was that you would eat too much fiber. You would have too much like vegetables, right? It'd be like, oh, I overate broccoli or peppers or something like that. And that's really not a big deal. Like, just besides maybe some of what the hardcore keto zealots would say, like, having some onions and stuff like that is not going to like kick you out of ketosis. You're going to be fine. But as kind of the food industry has caught up to keto, and there's become a lot more of these products on the market that are marketed as keto and they're marketed as low net carbs. Now it becomes a little bit more difficult because there's a lot that can be done in formulation, on both the kitchen chemistry side and just the way that things are positioned on the nutrition label to make something low net carb. But that doesn't mean that it's not going to spike your blood sugar. And that's kind of what's important as it relates to ketones. Like our ketones and blood sugar work inversely of each other most of the time. So when ketones go up, blood sugar's down. If we spike our blood sugar, then ketones go down. So that's why I always say, what really makes a food keto or not isn't about net carbs, or it isn't about total carbs. It's about, does it spike your blood sugar or not? So I think it's important to test, because there's a lot of, an example is the Smart Sweets gummies that are out on the market. They market themselves as 3 grams of net carbs. Maybe they've rebranded that lately because they've been called out a lot. I'm not sure. But they market it as like 3 grams of net carbs. And when I tested it on my blood sugar, it doubled my blood sugar from like 80 to 160. And for Dr. Gustin, it actually broke. He was wearing a CGM. It broke his CGM. It just turned it off. Like it didn't work. Wow. So it's like, yeah. So like if we were just going on net carbs there, you could have 10 packets of that, over the course of a day, and you'd be under like the 30 grams of net carb kind of standard recommendation you hear for keto. And you would definitely not be in ketosis from that. So over the years, all that's to say that I kind of tended to go towards total carbohydrates, especially if you're new to keto. I think that's the best approach, is to just go total and to focus on as many of those coming from whole foods. If you're eating primarily a whole food diet, then you might be able to get away with doing the net carb thing. But what's going to probably be your best bet at making at ensuring that you stay in ketosis, or that you get in ketosis, is going to be to track those total carbohydrates. So which is usually not a popular answer, because people, like the idea of like, oh, I can have, all these keto snacks and like stay underneath my carbohydrate threshold. But, unfortunately that's not the case, but it is important to point out that the testing, I think, is key, because there are some really great products out there. Like at Perfect Keto, when I was full-time there, when we would make new products, and they still do this too, but we'd make new products, we would do extensive blood sugar testing. So, our keto bars that we launched, have very, very minimal impact on blood sugar. So we focused on that, but not every company does that, especially some of these brands that are either bought out or are started by big food companies, right? Like if General Mills and like Kellogg's and stuff are putting out keto products, probably not doing the same level of testing that somebody like Perfect Keto or Kiss My Keto or some of like the smaller brands that are really passionate about keto are doing. So, that's kind of and even my answer from what's in the book to now has probably changed a little bit over the last 3 years, because the space has changed so much. So that's the first big one that we normally get. And then the second big, most common question is, do I have to stay keto forever? And I think that's kind of based around this idea that ketosis is an all or nothing thing, and that if we're in it, we have to stay in it, and coming out of it is like a bad thing. And the answer to that is, that's not the case. Cycling in and out of ketosis is fine. I think, again, you have to consider your goals. So if you what your main health goals are benefit from you being in ketosis, then you should probably be in ketosis more often than not. But some people may get to a point where they've got a ton of benefits from keto. They've restored their metabolic health. They have lost their weight, and they put their body in a position where it can actually maybe tolerate more carbohydrates, but tolerate them well, and actually utilize them. And even still be able to maintain a low state of ketosis because of how metabolically flexible they are. So when people get to this stage, then yeah, you might not need to stay in keto. You can come out of it. So I think that's and I think it's really key for even beginners to know the answer to that, because when you start keto, it's a big change, to go from, eating the standard American diet to following a keto low carb diet. It's a massive change. So It can be difficult. It can cause a lot of pain points. And when you're going through those pain points, if in your mind you're thinking, wow, I have to do this forever, chances are you're probably going to fall off and say, this isn't for me. So I think it is important for people to know early on that keto doesn't have to be a forever thing. But if you're in a state of like, you have a lot of weight to lose and your metabolic health is not where it needs to be, then it is a really good approach, and following it at that time of your journey is going to be great.
Well, you answered one of my questions that I was going
No.
to ask you anyway, about the net carbs and total carbs.
Oh, there you go.
Question constantly because I give people protocols, written protocols. I give them like after they've met with me on a personalized session, I give them a written protocol, and I do just written protocols for people based on, like you said, like their intake form and their goals and what they want to achieve and their family history and their labs and all of that. But it's like every time anybody asks me that question or sends me a DM, I'm just like, why do you want to know that? Like,
Yeah.
and it is, I think just our food industry manipulates so much. And I'm also having Jen Smiley on the podcast in a few weeks from Wake Up and Read the Labels, because the food industry wants in on any fad, and keto's hot right now. So they'll do anything they can to get a food out and put on the label, this is keto friendly, even though it's not. Like you said, it's more about the blood sugar response. It's not so much about the ingredients, it's how your personal body is reacting to it. So it's hard. It's a hard question to answer. And I am always I always say, let's start with total carbs. If you need to use some of those transition foods that are packaged, and because it is, like you said, it's a huge change to go from 300 to 400 grams of carbohydrates down to 100 or sometimes even less than that, if you want to be in ketosis more often. And let's transition you with some of those packaged foods that are, a little bit more keto friendly, a little bit more blood sugar friendly, until you can get to the point where you're consuming more whole natural foods, and then go from there. But I feel like people are set up for failure if they're just counting net carbs all day long and they're doing a lot of packaged foods. So, well, good. I want to make sure that we take advantage of all of your expertise with both Perfect Keto and BioCoach. But another question that I get constantly is, we were talking about protein before and how important it is, and women especially tend to undereat protein. So when I work with them, I look at what they're taking in, and as they're transitioning to more of a whole foods diet, making sure they're getting enough protein in so that they're staying full, they're reducing their cravings. I mean, all the building blocks of the amino acids that you need, and they're just not used to eating enough meat, enough eggs. And then this is a whole nother podcast topic. I have a lot of vegetarian, vegan writing in, like, can I follow your plan if I'm plant-based or vegan? But at the end of the day, there's a lot of people, women especially, who, have shied away from meat and meat-based products, who are asking about clean protein shakes, protein, collagen bars. So you mentioned a little bit about what you offer at Perfect Keto, but can you tell us, tell us about those products that are available, but then also just if somebody's in the grocery store or a big box food plate, like, is there anything that they can pick up and look at and say, okay, this would be at least a decent protein shake or powder or supplement, not so much a supplement, but something that I can add in to help me get a cleaner protein if I'm not getting it through Whole Foods? And that's hard.
Yeah, it is. Well, and it's a thing that can be necessary too. Like, it is difficult to eat more protein sometimes, especially if like your hunger levels aren't there. And that's where I think things like shakes can really come in and be beneficial, because if you're not hungry for a full meal, but you can drink a shake over the course of a couple hours that has 25 to 40 grams of protein in it, that may be a little bit more manageable. So I am a big fan of using protein shakes for this reason, because I think it's most people are under eating protein, so we want to make sure that we get it in. So I think when you're looking at things, what to look for, may not be the most popular answer in the plant-based community, but I really am a proponent of animal-based protein. I think that it is superior on all levels, from both, the micronutrient standpoint, which you do lose a little bit you lose quite a bit of micronutrients when you go from like a whole food protein source to like a supplement powder form. So that benefit between the two may wash out a little bit, but just the amino acid profile of an animal-based protein is superior to what you're going to find in a plant-based protein, and it's a little bit more natural to our biochemistry. So, our bodies, more contrary to a lot of the information that's out there, if you look at just our biochemistry, we do respond more favorably to animal-based protein than we do to plant-based protein. So, I think looking for animal-based proteins like whey protein, beef protein, egg protein, collagen, which would also be coming from beef in many cases. There are, forms of marine collagen and things like that, but I admittedly haven't done as much research on those. Those kind of are the best ones. So, and which one you use, it really depends on what your goal is. So, collagen is a lot different than, let's say, beef, egg, or whey protein. So we can kind of talk about like the beef, egg, and whey protein first. Perfect Keto, we have a whey protein. Equip Foods, which is also another company of Dr. Gustin's, has a beef protein that tastes really good. And then I don't really have a brand for egg protein, but I know there's a few out there. But these proteins are going to be contain all of your essential amino acids, but they're also going to contain the big ones, the branched chain amino acids, and especially leucine. And leucine is an amino acid that plays a really big role in a lot of different things. It doesn't get enough credit for what it does in the body, but it stimulates protein synthesis. So this is what helps us with preventing the degradation of muscle, repairing muscle, and then building muscle. And I know, you said your demographic is a lot of women. I know sometimes there's this fear of building muscle, but we're not talking about building muscle to look like, like Arnold Schwarzenegger. Like, we're talking about building muscle to be metabolically healthy. Like, our muscle is our most metabolically active tissue. When you have more of it, you burn more fat, you burn more carbohydrates, you have better metabolic health. So everybody wants to be building muscle, even if they think that they don't want to be. So these proteins are going to be really beneficial for that. So that's kind of, having those, whether it's like after a workout or just getting it in throughout the day, like it's good to get to stimulate that protein synthesis throughout the day, just to kind of prevent the breakdown of protein in muscle. So, at Perfect Keto, we have a whey protein isolate, which, I guess we can talk about that too, that there's many different types of whey protein, and whey protein is coming from dairy. So, some people have sensitivities to dairy, and usually the things that people have sensitivity with dairy is one of two things. It's either the sugar in there, which is lactose, or one of the proteins, which is casein. So in the case of whey protein, casein is actually removed out. So that's usually not an issue, but lactose can still be an issue. So if you just get like a regular whey protein concentrate, you'll notice if you look at the nutrition label, there might be a couple grams of sugar in there, and that's typically lactose that's in there. So if you're somebody who is very sensitive, then you might want to look for something like a whey protein isolate, where that lactose has been removed out and you're left with mostly just the protein. And a lot of times people who have sensitivities to dairy will find that they can tolerate the whey protein isolate. But in the case that you can't also tolerate that, because you have an extreme dairy intolerance, then that's where we're looking at like a beef or an egg protein. And I mentioned Equip just to say that, like, beef protein mostly tastes terrible. I've never had very many that have been good, but Equips is very good. Like, when I was in grad school, we were doing a lot of research with protein, and I remember having a beef protein that made me want to throw up. So the Equip one is actually very good tasting. They have a bunch of different flavors. So that's that side of it. I think, everybody can benefit from having those proteins. If they're not, like, if you're getting enough protein through a whole food diet, if you're hitting like where you need to be hitting through whole foods, then those proteins probably aren't all that necessary. Maybe after a workout, because it can be quicker absorbent. So that could maybe be a little bit beneficial, but generally speaking, probably not going to get a ton of extra benefit if you're already meeting your protein kind of goals. But if you're short of your protein goals, then those are going to be the best proteins to focus on incorporating. But then there's collagen, which is kind of a very popular protein now that so many brands have, and we have one over at Perfect Keto as well. And collagen is a lot different in its amino acid makeup. So collagen has these other amino acids in them, in higher concentrations, that are more related to things like our hair, skin, nails, gut health, joint health. And those collagen amino acids we produce those naturally, but as we age, I think it's like every year we like decrease our production by 1% of those natural proteins. And it's hard to get those proteins in our diet naturally because those are things that are found in like connective tissue and bone and stuff like that. So unless you're, eating like a nose to tail diet where you're consuming all parts of the animal, which many people aren't willing to do, then you're probably not getting a lot of collagen amino acids. And I'm calling them collagen amino acids just for simplicity's sake, but there are specific amino acids that fall into that. But you're not getting those things and you're decreasing your rate over time. So that's why as we age, we can start getting things like poor nail health, poor skin health, our joints deteriorate, our skin gets more wrinkly, like less elastic. We get more burnt when we're in the sun and things like that. So collagen supplement, even if you were meeting your protein goals, adding a collagen supplement in would still be beneficial because you're going to be getting these unique amino acids that you wouldn't otherwise have. So I think that, almost anybody can benefit from a collagen supplement. So I think that's one that you can add in kind of regardless of where you're at. But to round that out, I know I've been kind of rolling on the protein for a minute, but to round it all out, I think it is important to, when you're looking at brands, like you asked the question of going to a store, Perfect Keto, like I said, we focused on really clean ingredient stuff. Equip follows the same principle, so very clean ingredient. But there are also a ton of other great brands out there. But this is where looking at the ingredient labels is really important because a lot of companies will add in sugar to make it taste good, or they may use like a vegetable oil, or it's just some sort of like carrageenan or some other like pro-inflammatory ingredients. So all you really need in a protein is a protein, a fiber, and a sweetener. So like if you look at the Perfect Keto ones, it's like we do add MCT oil powder into a lot of ours, but the basic ingredients is it'd be like beef protein, acacia fiber, and stevia, and that's really all you should need to have in those. So definitely look for, I know some of the big brands that you look at their ingredient list and it's like a mile long, and there's really no need for a protein to have that long list of ingredients, and you're going to be sacrificing quality a little bit if you go for those. So yeah, that's always look at the ingredients.
Thank you for that. That is a really, really great explanation that I could not have given.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
I learned some about protein shakes as well, because I do, and I have people, like, I like to post what I'm eating, and of course everybody's individualized, but everyone wants to know what I'm eating and how I'm meeting my protein goals. So I post a lot on my Instagram stories, like what I'm eating, how I'm meeting my protein goals. But I do have people ask me, like, you don't really do shakes, do you? Or do you do collagen powder? And I do have collagen in the house, but I try to get it from whole natural foods. But there's just those days. I'm a mom of 3. I run my business. Like I do all the grocery shopping. And my husband works a ton, and at the end of the day, I'm like, okay, my fridge is bare, just like sometimes other people. That's going to be a can of tuna with some avocado mayo or whatever it is, and throw some pumpkin seeds in there. But I'm still falling short. So that's great to know that you can have those. Now, would you say for blood sugar dysregulation? Then we'll move on. Those who are having a lot of blood sugar dysregulation, which is a lot of the people who are listening to this podcast, is it important? I know you said sometimes, like with appetite, as a standalone product, that's okay. But would you recommend if people are having a lot of blood sugar issues, or pre-diabetes, type 2 diabetes, fatty liver, that they kind of have this with another meal and not in between? Is there a lot of everybody's different, but do you see a lot of blood sugar spikes from the isolates, or is it really individual, or should they be having them kind of as a supplement with their meals if they're falling short?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that question is and if you were to ask again, like some of the most common questions we get, a lot of them are like, will protein kick me out of ketosis, which is the same question of, will protein spike my blood sugar? That's where that's kind of coming from. And that is rooted in this. There's a process in our body called gluconeogenesis, where we produce glucose out of non-carbohydrate based foods, and primarily amino acids. So some of the amino acids found in protein can be converted over to glucose. But it's important to know that is it's more demand driven than it is supply driven. So having an excess of protein or having a big bolus of protein is unlikely to cause a big spike in your glucose. But if you have a demand for glucose and your body needs to be producing it, that's going to be kind of what stimulates it. So, and we see this even in the most metabolically unhealthy people. There's some protein overfeeding studies where they give like 50 grams of protein in a sitting to people with type 2 diabetes, which would kind of be considered the most metabolically unhealthy population. And we see, very minimal increases in blood sugar from that. So, in a lot of those studies, they are doing whole food versions of it. So, talking about a whey protein isolate that's going to be a little bit more rapidly digested, there is a possibility of seeing an increase in glucose. But I also think it's important to track that and find out, test. That's the best thing you can do is test, because it is a little bit different for everybody. But test compared to a regular meal, because I think there's this assumption that if you're following a keto or a low carb diet, the blood sugar is always flatlined and that nothing will ever spike it. But even if you have a fatty ribeye, where you're having like a really high fat, kind of moderate protein meal, you're still going to see some increase in blood sugar after a meal like that. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. So I think a lot of times people will drink a protein shake, they're expecting a flatline glucose response. They see an increase and then they say, oh, then, it must have been the protein gluconeogenesis. So I think there's usually other explanations for why it's happening. So I don't really think it's something for people to worry about. I think that doing it in between meals is a little bit better because that it allows you to kind of get that extra. Because the thing about protein is protein's used for a lot of things. I mean, the amino acids found in protein can help our body, like all of our bodily functions are required to have amino acids to kind of carry out the actions they're supposed to. So it's always beneficial for us to have some. So I think doing the in between the meals protein feeding for especially people with blood sugar dysregulation is going to be great, because with blood sugar dysregulation comes hunger and cravings, and it comes but I guess separately, those two things, hunger and then cravings. So having kind of a protein rich meal, protein is very satiating, can help us feel full. Having that in between our meals, I think, is going to help reduce our hunger in between meals, and which is I think going to keep us on track with our diet more. And then from a cravings perspective, one, if we're not hungry, we're probably going to have a reduced cravings. But also, if you do have a lot of cravings when you're kind of early on into your diet journey, these protein shake, there's great flavors. You have chocolate, you have like vanilla, all these things that can kind of actually cure your sweet tooth a little bit. In that case, it would be better. If you're having a craving in between meals, it'd be much better for you to reach for a protein shake than it would be for you to reach for the cookie jar, right? So I think I would actually recommend more for people with blood sugar dysregulation to have that, because protein is kind of like a great foundation for them to get their metabolic health back on track.
Yeah, I would agree, especially when people are starting out. I'm in general like, oh, let's try not to eat in between the meals and build you up to having balanced meals. But sometimes when you're just starting out and you have really high insulin levels and a lot of blood sugar dysregulation, or if you have hypoglycemia, trying to go too long in between meals when you're first starting and you're not metabolically flexible is really a challenge. So
yeah, definitely.
Great approach. All right. Well, tell us what you're doing over at BioCoach. I know you've transitioned more from Perfect Keto, where you were working with the food products, and I'm sure listeners are excited to check out those products, and we'll link those in the show notes. But now you're more of like the tech end. So tell us what you're doing at BioCoach and how we can learn more about you there.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you. Yeah, BioCoach has been really exciting. It was a big switch for me to go out of food and get into, at BioCoach, we have a medical device in our blood sugar and ketone meter, but we also have an app. So we have hardware and software. So that was a completely new industry for me, and that was by design. I was kind of looking to get to learn a little bit more about something else and throw myself into something I knew nothing about, and sink or swim. So it's been really cool. So what we're doing over at BioCoach is we are, our kind of general global mission is to combat metabolic disorders. So, we have 89% of the population is metabolically damaged. 1 in 3 adults in the US are pre-diabetic. 75% of them don't know they're pre-diabetic. Pretty staggering numbers. And if you break down the cost and the burden that has on our society, it's pretty massive. So we think that it's, one of the most important things for us to combat. And we don't think that the general medical community is doing a great job of it currently. A lot of it's more reactive medicine, and it's more symptom focused than it is root cause focused. So at BioCoach, we're trying to turn that around. So we have a medical device that is our blood sugar and blood glucose meter, and that syncs up to our BioCoach app, which not only tracks your blood sugar and blood ketones, but actually coaches you through it. So when you join BioCoach, you get access to a bunch of these tailored health quests that we have. So for example, you could join Dr. Jamie Seaman is our chief medical officer. You can join her intro to keto quest, where you join it, and each day you have tasks and videos and things that walk you through your journey. So there's education in it. There's recommendations of when to test your blood sugar. There's education of how to interpret your results. We have we're one of the integrations we're working on now is meal plan integrations, where each quest will come with a meal plan. We have a strategic partnership with Walmart that allows you to and that's the first grocer that we've started with, but that allows you to shop all of the recipes and meal plans in our app and order them for purchase or deliver, or for a pickup or delivery through our app. So we're trying to, pain point there is that healthy eating is hard, people not having the time to go do it. So we're trying to solve that pain point with some of the tech in our software. So it's one of those, like, we're really trying to create this platform. Like I always, when we compare to things, I always tell people it's kind of like the Peloton of metabolic health is what we're going for. We're trying to create this really fun, engaging community that is being proactive about preventing metabolic disorder, but then also kind of responding to the fact that 1 in 3 have prediabetes by providing a solution that is simple, easy, and fun. So the fun part is really big for us. We have gamification built into our app where you can take quizzes and if you get the question right, you can spin a wheel and you can win free perfect keto bars, and you can win discounts to all these different brands. I think we have like 40 to 50 partner brands at the moment. So the idea is that you'd be able, and we also you have an ability to earn what we call BioBucks, which is a currency that you can use to buy different things from our store, like our at-home A1C meter or ketone strips. Or you could buy, different products that we have partnerships with other companies. So it's really, it's been a really fun journey to work on this. We actually just last night shipped out our first batch of meters to beta testers. So we have 30 beta testers that are testing our app for the first time over the next 2 weeks. And then once we're done with that, and if everything is kind of going well, then we're going to launch it out to all the people who have pre-ordered. We have our pre-order open right now, where you can go reserve your spot in the pre-order, and we'll be launching that before the end of the year. And it's, our model is pretty interesting. So we're a subscription model where it's going to be, depending on the length of time you sign up for, somewhere around $30 a month. And with that, you get the blood sugar meter for free. And then you get unlimited blood glucose strips too, which I think is something that makes it a little bit unique. And our app tracks your strip usage. And when you get down to like 15 strips, it auto orders your next batch of strips, so that as a user, you never have to worry about running out of blood sugar strips, which, from talking to customers, especially type 2 diabetics, we've heard that that's a massive pain point. So that was why we put together that solution. So it's a good value add where you're getting all of your testing equipment paid for, but then also you're getting kind of this extra coaching and these things to kind of guide you. There's a lot of companies in the space. I think they're doing a great job on the tracking side of things. But a lot of them, while they're telling you what your data is, they're not telling you what to do with that data. And that's what we're trying to do a little bit differently over at BioCoach, is say, these are your blood sugar numbers, but here's what they mean, and here's what we can do to make them better, and here's an actual plan for doing that. So it's come with a lot of pain points. I've had a lot of sleepless nights over the last year going through this. We every couple of weeks we have to sit down as a team and talk about how we're creating something that doesn't exist. And that comes with a lot of difficulties and pain points. We've had pre-order open for a long time. We've had a lot of people who have been emailing us asking when we're going to be launching. And the truth is that we're every single day we're going in, and I'm flying up to Minnesota and meeting with our developers, and we're working crazy hours to try to get this app built. And we finally have it to a point where we're ready to have some people get some eyes on it. So that's really exciting for us. And we hope that by the end of the year, as long as we don't break anything over here, we hope that by the end of the year, we'll be able to open it up to everybody else.
Yeah, I didn't realize it was that new and you're just getting the beta testing going for that. So that's remarkable and
Yeah.
it helps so many people and super affordable. And I know that that's always one of the roadblocks for the CGM and the continuous
Hmm.
glucose monitor is like you have to be diabetic in order to wear one, and not everybody can afford to wear those. So it's like a are you testing the glucose and the ketones in the blood, or how are you
Yeah,
testing?
so we're doing finger prick for it, which that was a tough thing for us because the CGMs are obviously they're less invasive. Well, it depends how you look on it. You don't have to prick your finger every time, but it does live on your arm. But they're a little bit less invasive. If you're averse to finger pricks, it's they're better. It's very cool to see the trend over time of tracking your data. So it was kind of a hard thing for us to determine, but the couple things that we really wanted to focus on is that in that 1 in 3 adults with prediabetes and the 89% they're metabolically damaged, there's a lot of people that either aren't diagnosed diabetic yet, so they can't get those things, which is one of the reasons why we exist, or they just can't afford. There are becoming more. There's more access to CGMs if you're not diagnosed nowadays through some of these other companies that have come to market. But and I think those companies are doing a great job, but it's they're not as affordable. Not everybody can afford those things, so we wanted to provide an option that was more affordable for people, so that that wouldn't be a barrier for them. And I know, looking at like in I was talking to my dad, recently, and he was talking about his benefits offered through his company, and they have a couple different diabetes management solutions, but you have to be diagnosed as a diabetic to be able to use them. And that was kind of a big eye opener for me. I remember hearing that, being like, wow, so instead of giving people access to these tools before they get diabetes, we wait until they have it and then we give it to them. And that was kind of for I think all of us at BioCoach was just like an eye opener of like, yeah, this is why we exist. Like we can't wait for the medical community to catch up. You can't just continue arguing with your doctor about getting that fasting insulin test to determine, if you're actually diabetic or not. You can't count on, all these, some of the, just the medical community as a whole being able to make us better. Sometimes we have to be proactive and we have to get it done. So that's what we're trying to do at BioCoach, is give people options, who kind of feel like maybe they don't have options, and give it to them in an affordable way. So, right now we are doing the finger prick, glucose and ketones. We are, in some, we're doing some R&D on some other solutions that we'll be excited to announce, in the next, coming years. But for now, I think that's going to be our best step forward for trying to help as many people as we can.
Awesome. I know that last question, then we'll wrap
Mhm.
up where to
Yeah,
find. But it just made me think of one last question. I know that insulin is tough to measure because it's a hormone.
mhm,
It's not like just measuring your blood glucose in the blood. And like you said, a lot of it's sometimes very inconvenient to get a fasting insulin because not every practitioner will run one for you. And if they do, they don't know how to interpret it. But do you see anything coming on the horizon for measuring fasting insulin on home
totally.
or anything? Is it okay?
Yeah, yeah, and I think
There
it's
was
it's
something, but I'm
really.
like, oh, I thought we were a ways away from that yet.
Well, I think there's some solutions now, and I think there's going to be some good ones coming down the pipeline. And for a little bit of context, the insulin is really important because what happens in kind of the traditional medical approach is that we measure fasting blood sugar, and we measure it until it gets to a point where it's high, and then we track insulin. But the problem with that is that research has shown, and Dr. Ben Bickman, who's my favorite researcher, talks a lot about this, that he that you can have blood sugar, or you can have high insulin levels for up to 10 years before your blood sugar is out of whack. So blood sugar, that's not to discredit the metabolic marker of blood sugar, because it is really important, but it's not the only marker that we can look at, and only looking at it doesn't get you a full picture of your health. So a lot of folks will just, their blood sugar will creep up every year a little higher, and their doctor will say, oh, you're not there yet, oh, you're not there yet. And then one day it's over 120, and the doctor says, let's test insulin, and
Right.
then sure enough, insulin's high. So it's really important for us to have a grasp on that. So, the solutions that you have is that, you can always ask your doctor. Doctors tend to be a little bit more reluctant, but, I am hearing more success stories of people, their doctors being responsive to their requests, and getting that done. So, hopefully that's being better. So that's one solution. Two, you can go get blood work done yourself. So you can go to like a Quest Diagnostics or some of those other, and you can pay for it out of pocket. And then there are some at-home testing kits. Like I think the one company that I've recently seen is like So Well, I think is the one.
Yeah, I
And
have.
they do at,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I haven't tested that one yet. And, admittedly, I haven't done a ton of research into the validity of those tests. Like, if they, I know some different at-home tests aren't as accurate as like the larger blood panels. So I haven't looked as much into that one, but I know that's a solution that currently exists. But I also think that, and I know there's some development of this going on now, that one day the continuous insulin monitor will be something that will be on the horizon, and that will be exciting because there are some cases of foods that there's foods that maybe don't spike your blood sugar, but they do spike your insulin. Not as common, usually those two things are happening in synchrony, but it does happen. So being able to capture that, with insulin, or just to be able to better capture, fasting insulin versus fed insulin levels. Like when we go into a doctor's office, we're normally just getting fasting insulin, but it'd be great to be able to see what is the insulin response to the foods that we're eating in our day-to-day life. So, I think some of that work is happening. How close we are to those being out, I don't know, but it does seem like, we've been innovating at a pretty rapid pace in the health field. So, I would speculate that in the next couple of years, it's mostly, I think, about demonstrating the need for that, right? I think as more people realize how important that measure is and how flawed our approach to getting it right now is, that will create the necessity for somebody to go, really push along the development of a product like that. So I'm optimistic on it, but we'll see.
Absolutely agree. It's just not common knowledge. And a lot of my
Yeah.
clients are like, hey, have you had a fasting insulin drawn? And they'll respond, yeah, it's 115. I'm like, nope, that's your fasting blood sugar. Ask for a
Yeah.
insulin. And they're like, well, but what I have. I'm like, nope.
Not the same.
Not the same. So yeah, there's just definitely some education that needs to happen around there. And those ships are slow turning. So
They are.
yeah, absolutely. But we appreciate you being on today. I found you on Instagram. Been following your work for a long time and the book, but where can people find and learn more about you?
Yeah, no, well, thank you so much for having me on. It was awesome chatting with you. And you mentioned Instagram, the Ketologist. That's kind of my primary social media platform. That's the one where I'm most responsive on, and it's the only one I can keep up with.
Right.
So yeah, I can't do more than one. So that's where I'm a little bit active on Twitter, but Instagram's kind of the main spot. And then I also have a newsletter called the Thinking Health newsletter that is on Substack. So that's a free newsletter where it's a little bit more around nutrition philosophy. So it's kind of how to think, or just health philosophy as a whole. So how to think about health, different mindsets to help us be more successful in our health journey, different ways of thinking about things. So that's something that I usually put out at least once a week, a new newsletter on a topic there. So you can join that one. And then I have the Keto Answers podcast, which is hosted through Perfect Keto. And we typically release an episode once a week, where we have people on from doctors in the keto space all the way to influencers in the space. So those are kind of the best areas to find my work.
Yeah, I listen to your podcast all the time. So I've
No,
learned
thank you.
a ton from there. So thank
Yeah,
you.
I'm super fortunate that I've been able to have some awesome guests on there. Like the responsiveness of people to say yes to come on shows that has been amazing. I mean, getting such these amazing high profile doctors to come on makes my job really easy, because all I have to do is think of questions to ask really
Yeah.
interesting people, which is not that hard.
Like me today, I've just been sitting back and letting you teach everybody. So I love it.
Yeah, that's great.
We appreciate your time. We'll link everything in the show notes and where to find you. And hopefully you'll get a few more podcast listeners out of it and a few more followers. And thanks for doing all the work that you're doing. And we are looking forward to BioCoach just growing. And I know people will be really excited about that. So thanks for all your work.
Awesome. Thanks for having me on today.